Welcome to today's Armor lecture. I'll just introduce myself real quick. For those who don't know me, I'm Jamie Kelly. I'm a McCarter Collections Manager for Anthropology here at the Field Museum. And it's really my pleasure and honor to be able to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Almira Gilles, who will be speaking today on ethnoastronomy among indigenous communities in the Philippines. And it's then only fitting that I acknowledge that the Field Museum resides within the traditional homelands of the Ho-Chunk, Oto, Missouri, Iwas, Menominee, Meskwaki, Sauk, Miami, Way, Piankashaw, Kickapoo, Alani Confederacy, Ojibwe, Adawa, and the Potawatomi. We're grateful for the original peoples who laid the foundations for the city of Chicago and the diverse indigenous nations that reside in the Chicagoland area today. I recognize the museum has played a harmful role in its past in the colonization of others, and that land acknowledgements like this one are meaningless unless we take meaningful action to address the past and support land-back movements of indigenous peoples. One way we do this is through an evolving practice of co-curation of the joint stewardship of collections with community partners. So for over 14 years, Almira has been one of our first partners to assist us with stewarding the Philippine collections here at the Field Museum. Her work with us, along with that of other community partners, has led to community-driven programs around the collections, exhibits, and a grant 11 years ago that launched our 2-year digital co-curation project and an online curation portal for the collections. Almira specializes in indigenous cultural knowledge and biodiversity conservation. Her most memorable cultural heritage project was an international artist exchange funded by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation called Art and Anthropology, Portrait of the Object as Filipino at the Field Museum. Her most fulfilling biodiversity initiative was Hotspot, Cool Country, Biodiversity in the Philippines, a finalist at the Philippine National Book Development Board Awards in the science category. She has received a Panananig Philippine Presidential Award as well. Almira is a Field Museum Research Associate and is president of the Hanabi Project, which is a trans-Pacific organization dedicated to the promotion, preservation, and practice of Philippine weaving arts and natural fiber. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Almira Gilles.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome to my talk on the ethnoastronomy project that I just finished actually this year. I was in the Philippines for 1 to 3 months, but first of all, I'd like to say just what a spectacular night sky we've been treated to, the past few days with the Northern Lights. And so I thought that was just a fitting prelude to my talk. And I see that actually as a sign from the universe that, providing encouragement for this talk today and the project in general. But that's what our forefathers did. They looked to the night sky for symbols and meaning and guidance for their daily lives. And that's what I try to do here is I went to the northernmost province of the Philippines, which is always on the path of typhoons. We've had 21 typhoons this year in the Philippines, 2 in the past 2 weeks. The last one was very strong. And Batanes, where I went, is often on the path of the typhoon. That's the exit. So you'll see the effect of weather on a lot of their traditions. And what I'll basically do is just talk off of the slides, a lot of visuals. I won't have a lot of text, so I'll just do a little bit of storytelling. So let me start with the first slide. That is my website for the First Skies project, ethnoastronomy. Astronomy, so the less celestial sky, in this case, it's just the night sky, and how traditions are impacted by what they see in the sky. Okay. Let's see. Oops. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to get to the second slide. Sorry, that's,
Keys here.
yeah.
Back. Is that it? Yeah, so I think just.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, thank you. So just a brief history of where I was. It's called Batanes. It's composed of three main islands. The people, the indigenous group there is Ivatan. Now, this is a really rare case, not only in the Philippines, I think, but in the world, because only members of the Ivatan community can live, can reside on the three islands in this province. So you have to either be married to an Ivatan or of Ivatan descent. So it was kind of easy finding respondents because all I had to do was, well, I had a huge sample. Everybody there was Ivatan. And their ancestors migrated about 4,000 years ago. And they were also affected by Spanish rule. So we were under Spain, the Philippines, from 1565 to 1898. And in 1783, Batanes was officially recognized by Spain as a separate province. And then the United States came and occupied us, and I'm saying occupied because that is the operative word. Um, and, you know, they were there from 1898 to 1946. During World War II, that's when they left, basically 1945. So the people in Ivatan were influenced by, well, the Spanish, the Japanese, and the Americans. And I have here on your left the Murillo Velarde map. It's, I believe, 1783, 1734. This was published by a Spanish, a Jesuit cartographer. So Christianity was brought to the Philippines by the Spaniards. And so you will see in this map that Batanes, where I went, is not on it. And on the right is a present day, pretty much that's uh, what Batanes is today. It's all the way north. You can barely see it. Now, what did I do? I actually brought one. I used equatorial star charts. If you're not familiar with it, you can basically see, let's see, we're November 12, right there, and facing south, because the Philippines is north of the equator. Batanes is about 20 degrees north of the equator and 121 degrees of the prime meridian. So we are north of the equator, just like the US. And here you could see whatever constellations are supposed to be in the night sky. Not always good when I was there because it was often cloudy. Now, the purpose of my study, I wanted to document Ivatan traditions and knowledge about astronomy. The ethnoastronomy research in the Philippines is actually, there's been quite a lot of it, but not in Batanes because Batanes is so hard to get to. It's often visited by typhoons. There's only one flight in and out. But in other places of the Philippines, especially the south, you know, Mindanao and Luzon, the other big province, there are a lot of researchers have actually documented like the local names for constellations and the moon, but very little has been done for Batanes, and that's why I went. So I was inspired by Dr. Ambrosio's Balatic study in Tawi-Tawi, another place that I have visited. Tawi-Tawi is the southernmost part of the Philippines. And I went and found the last culture bearer with knowledge about the stars in Tawi-Tawi. And that's the man you see lying down. So I had to travel by boat in pirate-infested waters. Um, and my boat actually broke down. The engine broke down. And I had two engines specifically for that purpose in case it broke down. But the boatman said, no, 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 we're going to try and fix it. You know, we're saving the second one. And so there we were floating, and um, those waters are frequented by pirates from Indonesia. Anyway, pirates from abroad, and communist insurgents and Muslim insurgents. So not a fun thing to do, but I found this guy, and we sat in a deserted airstrip, and he was pointing there at the stars, talking about the traditions in southern Mindanao. And so I wanted to not really replicate the study, but find out just what the traditions were in Batanes, since I didn't have as much research to use, and I specifically wanted to use the grounded theory approach, where I go in and not really have a preconception of their traditions and culture. So I wanted to have them tell me what those customs were. And specifically, I wanted to know, well, you know, the thing about the night sky is the night sky we see now is not the night sky of our ancestors because of satellites, right? And I have a star app that shows me on my phone where the satellites are. And so one of my questions to them was, well, what do you think? You look at the night sky and there's an extra maiden crossing, you know, the sky before there were three. How do you feel about that? Do you even recognize the night sky as it is now? And I'll tell you my finding later on, which was really interesting. So a little bit about the Ivatan in Batanes. They are mainly farmers and fishermen, so agriculture and fishing. So it's very seasonal when they're not fishing, and there's a limited fishing season and a limited farming or agricultural season. They're very hilly, much like Scotland. So not the warm, sun-kissed beaches that you think of in the Philippines. And we have 7,461 islands, most of them with, beaches and really warm weather. This being northernmost, it's actually closer to Taiwan. In fact, you can get radio frequencies from Taiwan. And also, there's an American presence in one of the islands. Just in case, they're just there. The military is not in the island I went to. It was too far north. But so it's a strategic place too for the American military. So it's very hilly, as you can see. And because they are often visited by typhoons, their agriculture is mainly focused on root crops. So they have sweet potato, cassava, bananas, sugarcane, corn. And one of the beliefs here is that don't let your basket, and see the lady with a sort of cone-shaped basket. And we have one in the Field Museum, in our Philippine collection. We have a similar basket. So if that rolls down the hill, then that's a bad omen. So you should be careful not to let your basket roll down the hill, or a landslide will occur. Also, they believe that you have to plant from the new moon to the full moon, because that's when growth will occur. The growth will follow the waxing of the moon. So after, when the moon starts to wane, then you don't plant anymore. And what she is wearing in the middle, what they are wearing, is the traditional Ivatan headgear, different for women, and it's made of straw, and it extends to the back. Oh, and I was going to bring my version of what the man was wearing. Someone made it specially for me, but I just forgot. And what they do is, everything is communal. So if they find out that, let's say, a friend is going to be planting at this time, they all go there, help in the planting, and then we're all fed. I was fed twice, and I was there like 4 hours. And in fact, I was given food to take home. So they're very hospitable. And there they are cooking lunch for everybody there. And the fishermen, so because their topography is very different from the rest of the Philippines, lots of hills and, well, maybe low mountains, they don't venture very far. They have these wave-cut cliffs. So, and because of the strong winds and the currents, what they usually catch are flying fish and dorado, but there's a season for that. They use nets, they use spear fishing, hook and line, and they only fish in the first quarter because then the current is not too strong, and that's good for fishing. They don't venture out very far from the island because then they'd be in Taiwan waters. And plus the currents are just so strong. So they're not surrounded by, nice, gentle, the Pacific Ocean. Methodology. What did I do? Basically, first I had to request, this was funded by the National Commission on Culture and the Arts, the Philippine National Commission on Culture and the Arts. And after I got approval from them, the Philippine government, then I had to go get permission from the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, or NCIP. Any research that is done in the Philippines, social science, biological, and Larry, you know this very well. You've had your entanglements with the NCIP because that's where scientists go. They go to, where the specimens are, they go where the ethnic groups are, the indigenous communities. So you have to get permission from the NCIP, and that's a long, really labored process. But it's not just the national NCIP, then you have to go to the regional. The regional NCIP office has to approve whatever you're doing, and they don't always do that. And it can take months just to get permission. So apparently, I was one of the few who was able to get permission like in a short time. And after, actually, after I got permission from the NCIP in that northern region, then I had to get permission from the NCIP in Batanes. So there were like 4 NCIP hurdles that I had to jump over. And then after that was approved, then they said, now you have to ask the Council of Elders. And I didn't put up my meeting with the Council of Elders here because I don't have permission from them yet to show their faces. But there are 3 main islands, and I had to get elders from all 3 islands to say yes to the study. Because they couldn't all travel to where I was, we did Zoom, which was, I think, almost a first for them, especially those in the northernmost region. But I explained the purpose of the study, and they said yes unanimously. But they had several requirements. One is that I use it for the education of their children, that I come up with like a children's book. And I am a children's book writer as well. So I said, sure, I would love to do that. And then they said, and before you submit your report to the National Commission on Culture and the Arts, we want to check every term that you put in that report, the glossary of terms, because there are 2, if not 3 distinct dialects right in Batanes. And so they said often people come here and they misspell things, and so they're not sensitive to differences even between towns in the same area. there are differences in language. So they wanted to make sure that I got that right. And also, they wanted to read the full report after. So I have to get to that. However, a typhoon just passed. Nobody is talking to me from there. So I will have to go back to the Philippines and actually pay my respects again to them. Oh, I fed them, which is, very typical. Hospitality is a big tradition in the Philippines. So there they were. And they seemed pleased, they seemed eager to hear what I would find. And so I was lucky to have three photographers. One was a documentarian, one was actually a wildlife photographer. He came for the birds. Um, and also an astral photographer. And he took a lot of these shots that you will see. And Batanes is one of the best places to do stargazing in the Philippines, as you will see from many of these pictures. And this involved a lot of getting up at 2 in the morning to see if the cloud cover isn't too thick and we can see enough stars. So the whole month I was there, I was, yeah, up at like 2. Getting there, so there are 3 main islands, but I just went to 2 of them. And I just have pictures here of, well, the last one with the jeepney, that's actually not from there, but that's one of the modes of transportation that I've done for my other research. A lot of boats, and I particularly like the one in the bottom where I think, can you see the pig? So that was an early morning ride to Sabtan. And on that small boat, which is about the size of this stage, they put motorcycles, jeepneys, animals, and us. And the waves are often rough from one island to another. And I saw dolphins just racing us to the, so it was beautiful. Uh, but if you're not used to riding rough waters, then that gets a little uncomfortable. Here's some more pictures of that boat. And our boats, the boats in Batanes are different from other parts of the Philippines. They don't have outriggers because just because of the current, the water's too strong. If you had outriggers, those bamboo things, floaters on the side of the boat, like they have in more peaceful waters in the Philippines, then those would break in the currents in Batanes. So they have those. One thing that I found really interesting was the picture with the stones. So that's a graveyard. And researchers have said that they've only found one other place with these markings, with the stones and the rocks arranged like this, like a boat, and those are Vikings. And the headstone faces the ocean, so there's speculation that maybe Vikings visited the Philippines. I don't know, but that's just one other place. And we had to hike to the top of a mountain to find these graveyards. Visiting with culture bearers. So after I got permission from the Council of Elders, I asked for recommendations for whom to interview. And I wanted to make sure that I got a good sample of people from different towns. And they did. They gave me a list, often hard to pin them down. Like I'd go there and you don't call them and make appointments. You just go there and they'd be, oh, he's out fishing, or oh, he's in the farm, or he's off doing something else. So when I did catch them at home, then I would just like, for example, the guy with the red shirt, he was the leader of the fishermen, which is the middle picture. So I had to meet with a group of 40 fishermen just to explain what the project was. And I don't speak their language, so I had an interpreter, although they speak Tagalog, and they proudly said, and we speak English too, because they were colonized by the Americans. as well. And a lot of their language has Spanish words, just like the rest of the Philippines. So I met with them at night when they were all home or there. They were gathered in a communal meeting place, and I tried to explain what my study was about. And there's a pot in the middle. They were ready to eat, but I took like 20 minutes of their time. They graciously let me in and just talked to them a bit. To your right is a conch shell, and they still use that for alerting friends for different things. They said they use that for just telling people to gather. And there are certain signals, like there's a call for gathering people to help in the fields. There's a call for fishing and a call for partying. So, and because they like to gather just to drink. Drinking is a big thing in Batanes. Well, when you have their kind of weather and you're stuck at home, you know. So, and they still use that to this day. Sabtang was the other island that I went to, and there I am talking to the auntie of the photographer, Nolly, who took most of these pictures. And in the middle, I'm talking to someone who made me a hat. And they're very, there's one of the sweetest people I know. So this man, I went there to interview him, and he said, "I'll make you a hat, but you have to come back for it in about a week." And I wasn't able to go back in a week because the currents were too strong. And he's the most famous hat maker there. So I thought, oh, when I come back, probably, it probably won't be there anymore. So I did. And he said, lots of people wanted to buy that hat, but this hat is for you. And so he took it from his house and gave it to me. So, I think that's really sweet. And then on the right is a fisherman. He invited me to go fishing with him next time I come back. And again, that is rare. Apparently, you just don't get invited to sit in their boats. So they were very hospitable people. And some more pictures of the agricultural land, the meeting with the fishermen, and then me taking pictures on that boat on the way to Sabtan. Ivatan homes, pretty different from the rest of the Philippines. These are not attached, bamboo things because of the frequency of typhoons there. So they have stone houses that you don't see anywhere else in the Philippines. And I walked around the village and was welcomed into their home as well. Traditional knowledge and practices. I will focus on one in particular called the Kapay Vanu Vanwa, and this is the opening of the port or breaking of the port. So Dorado season, you know what Dorado is, right? These big fish. You can only catch that from March for a few months. And before they can go out and start fishing, they have a ritual. And this is by invitation only because they really didn't want this to be like a tourist thing. So at the break of dawn, even before they slaughter a pig and open its stomach, look at the entrails, and from there, they will predict whether it will be a productive season, if they will catch a lot of fish, or if how many people will get hurt or die. So basically, two things from the entrails of a fish. And then they cut off a leg of that pig and drag it along the beach, the seashore where the fishermen will cast off from, sort of spilling some of the blood over the rocks. And I don't have a picture of when then the shaman, he doesn't like being called a shaman, but he's like a priest of some sort. I mean, he's the leader of the fishermen. he will say, he will give a message, doesn't want to call it a prayer. By the way, most of the Yucatan are Catholic because of the Spaniards, but they still hold some of their own traditional beliefs. Like for this one, he will, while waving the hind quarter of a pig, he will tell the ocean, please give us your blessing to go and cast off. Please keep our fishermen safe. And an interesting, so I'm a social scientist, like I like talking about different cultures, especially in the Philippines. One point of conflict that I was witness to was, so this Kapay Vanu Vanua takes place in different, 2 or 3 villages. And in one of them, they said, oh, we want to hold mass, like a Catholic mass on the beach alongside with this ritual, and which is not Christian. And so they were saying, but why? This is tradition. It's not animistic, really. They don't want to say that because they're Catholic. Let's just keep it pure. Let's just keep this as it is. But then they insisted on bringing a priest down and hearing mass. So that should be interesting to look at. So when they broke, I have here a picture of the lead person examining the gallbladder. And so if there's something inside it, that means the catch will be bountiful. If the liver is clean, oh no, no, if the liver leaks, then that means there will be a lot of death. And so I asked him what the prediction was for this season, and he said, regular. I said, regular, okay, I guess that's good. That's neither good nor bad. Um, And there we are, me and my research assistant, Juan, so we're eating off of the breadfruit leaf, which they use as plates in gatherings. I mean, they don't use the disposable ones. They apparently every household has a breadfruit tree from which to gather leaves from and use. And they also use this as wrapper. If you, they will always ask you to bring home some food, so they will wrap it in that. But here, so they fed everybody that was there. And there were about 2 or 3 groups there. So they cooked the pig. And that certain gathering, that certain ritual, a politician donated an extra pig. So we had a lot of pork to go around. And there I am donating a box of drinks because they really appreciate that. So I donated it to the leader of the fishermen. So what happens after the ritual is then they designate one person in particular to be the first to cast off in his boat and catch the fish. And if he comes back okay, then the rest follow. I'll be getting to ethnoastronomy in a bit. And just pictures of 3 of my photographers and myself trying to capture images. And it's a rocky beach, not the fine sandy ones. So again, different from the rest of the Philippines. Another practice they have is what's called the piloton, or spelled different ways. And it's a diary based on the, what do you call it? Horoscope. So, for example, and so they base their activities or events on this diary. And they still use it, but not frequently. So they use this as a guide, for example, for laying the foundation of a house or starting a business or building a boat, planting, getting married, or starting a journey. For example, any day under Aries is good for planting, no cutting of hair. Taurus, planting or buying animals. So here I have a list of sample divinations. When I went to the hat maker, he said, "Oh, you know what? You should come back when it's a Libra day because then you might find someone." Filipinos are very romantic. So I said, "Okay, yeah, I've got that covered." So, um, and this is just a sample. They have one for every sign. Findings, okay. The picture of the man holding a cell phone. So he received an award for fishing. So he was recognized for being a leader among the fishermen. And so I was really anxious to interview him. And he said, you know, I don't even really use a lot of traditional forecasting methods when it comes to fishing anymore because now we have apps. And there he is showing, you know, his cell phone. And I thought, well, yeah, of course. But I thought, but do you get coverage when you're way out in the ocean? I mean, yeah, when you're so far from shore. And that's where the satellites come in. So he said, you know, we're actually really grateful for the satellites because they have given us frequent and reliable Wi-Fi. So my question about, oh, what do you think of the satellites encroaching upon your night sky? Not an issue. I didn't even ask them about that because they were very, very grateful. So he said, yeah, so we combine a lot of traditional and modern methods for agricultural, because he's also a farmer. Everybody there is a fisherman and a farmer, a fisher folk and farmer. The other thing he said is that they used mostly the moon and the wind direction for everything except for the morning star or Venus, which they use as a sign for whether it's time to go home, to return to shore. And so I was a little disappointed because here I was gonna get the names of the constellations and their stars and figure out how, you know, Orion's belt or the Pleiades, like they do in other parts of the Philippines and even Asia and, you know, the Marae. But they said no. A lot of them weren't even familiar with the names of constellations because everything is by the moon, from the waning of the moon, waxing of the moon, what shape. If you have a crescent moon, for example, with stars close to the points, that means be careful around animals because you could get gored by an animal with horns. So, and that was frequently, everybody I interviewed mentioned that. So it's pretty much I think, a common belief. Um, and so, you know, if the moon is a certain shape, if it's upside down, so everything was the moon. And that really, for me, was quite a revelation and really humbling because here I was going to compile like a, you know, a study that about Ivatan astronomy, and it's really just the moon and wind directions. Um, they also use the Southern Cross, but then they also said, well, because we're so mountainous and we're so hilly, sometimes, you know, the stars are covered by the mountain. So you don't even see it there, depending on where that star or that constellation is. So it's not reliable, but the moon you can usually see. So that's, I thought, really interesting. Uh, and also, um, when I was there, that was not a typhoon season. So I really have to go back and stay there the rest of, you know, the year and see how that impacts what they do. So the Philippines really has only two seasons, wet or dry. And so I was there kind of during the dry season, but what do they do when they're stuck at home? And when typhoons are battering their islands. And these are more just pictures I wanted to show off. There's the Milky Way. And also they said, oh, the Milky Way, yeah, so I don't know if there are astronomers here, but the position of the Milky Way shifts as well. And so you can't always see all of the stars at once. Sometimes it's straight up horizontal. I mean, vertical, sometimes it's close to the ground and horizontal. So another reason why they don't see that as a reliable um, tool for everyday lives and for agriculture or fishing, but the moon is usually just there. Doesn't move around very much. Well, it does, but much more visible than individual constellations. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my collaborators because there were many. So the National Commission on Culture and the Arts that gave funding for this study, or will be giving funding for this study. The National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, the Ivatan Council of Elders, Yuan, who's my very able research assistant, my photographers, Nolly, Ivan, and James, and then various people who are connected with different agencies there. Um, not either were helping me in their official capacity or just personal, just hanging out with us. And then the owners of my homestay. Oh, the other thing that I love about Bataan is there are no fast foods. There are no big hotels. Everything is a homestay if you go there. There are no major restaurant chains. It truly is a very special place. So they're just not allowed. And a friend from Chicago also who helped. And some of the challenges that I encounter, especially um, as a woman going to all these remote places is, well, there's no public transport to get there, so you have to make special arrangements to get there, and then unfamiliar food, and the language barrier, of course, there are over 200 ethno-linguistic groups in the Philippines, and domestic terrorism, as I mentioned, from the National People's Army, which is communist, the Abu Sayyaf, which is a Muslim insurgent group, and pirates. And so all of these are actually pictures of Tawi-Tawi in southern Philippines. And just a little bit about the Philippine ethnographic collection here that Jamie mentioned. So we invite groups from different, well, I guess we invite different communities to come and look at the collection in the vaults. We have people from the government, for example, the Philippine Textile Research Institute, the Department of Science Industry, any dignitary. I try to show them the collection just so that they'll know what we have here, the wealth that we have here. And I always like to end with, because I'm also a writer, I like to end with just food for thought. So, and because I'd like to just pay tribute to all of you scientists out here and the scientists of the Field Museum who are involved in so many areas of research. Um, so those of you who are engaged in this very noble but difficult work of scientific discovery, I thank you for your work. And also, although it sounds great, astronomy, the universe is what you're researching. I like what Walt Whitman said. He said, even a leaf of grass is no less important than a whole constellation. So thank you very much. And I guess now we open it to question and answer.
Great, thank you so much, Almira. Are there any questions? I will ask you to use the microphones just so, because we're recording this, so folks who see the recording can hear questions or comments. I guess one question I had, some of the challenges you mentioned, are many of those specific to the southern Philippines, or did they also apply to the northern Philippines and Batanes where you were at?
Well, it's more dangerous in the southern Philippines because there's more conflict there. Um, so in Batanes, I really didn't encounter a lot of threats to anything. It was just hard getting around because of the hilly terrain and also traveling between islands. But it was pretty safe, especially because, well, geopolitically, Taiwan is friendly to the Philippines. And there was a contingent of American troops in Itbayat, the northernmost island of the Philippines. And I don't know if that made me feel any safer, but it was easier getting around there. I could pretty much go anywhere. Unlike in the southern part of the Philippines, I always had to have a military or police escort wherever I went, and interpreters anywhere I went.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
You mentioned that the people use mainly the moon and the direction of wind to guide them in their agriculture and fishing. How accurate and effective has that been?
Yeah, that's a good question because, I was wondering about, well, if these beliefs persist, right? These non-scientific beliefs and practices persist, there must be evidence for them working, right? So I'm sure if we were to really look into it, that a lot of these, like the shape of the moon, um, affecting when they go out to fish, well, that's because it's high tide when the moon is full, right? But they don't really necessarily connect that scientific explanation to the practice. They just say, oh yeah, well, you go out there when the moon is full, and that means that it will be a bountiful catch, right? But I suspect that a lot of their beliefs are tied to some sort of scientific explanation.
Anyone else?
Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering, you were asking a lot of questions about using the moon or the stars as guidance for work, but are there other cultural stories or understandings behind constellations there? Like, growing up without any sort of traditional cultural history, I still had stories about different constellations and stuff. So I'm wondering if those exist and if you were told stories about some of the origins of constellations or groups of stars that they were noticing.
Mhm. Thank you. So before I started this research, I familiarized myself with other astronomical traditions in various parts of the Philippines, and there is a wealth of that. And so I was eager to see what was being practiced in Batanes. And so there wasn't. And so I couldn't ask about the origins. A lot of them didn't even know the names. They didn't have names for stars or constellations, but they had many names for different types of wind, I mean, different directions of the wind, different shapes of the moon, so I couldn't pursue that. I was ready. And I think, when I submit my paper, I will, of course, when I do a review of literature, I will mention the other traditions in other parts because it is really very rich in other parts of the Philippines.
Are there questions? I mean, can you go back? Are there questions that you now have that you've sat sort of with this research that you want to go back and ask to get more details about?
Well, I would still like to pursue that, those satellites in the sky. Although they don't really look at constellations very much, but I was actually told to talk to like a sea captain who said he does use astronomical charts because he would venture outside of the periphery of Batanes and go to almost to Taiwan. And he used navigational and astronomical charts to navigate. And so I would like to talk to him and see. And he is now retired and lives in Batanes. I couldn't find him. But I would like to sit down with him and say, so what are your thoughts on using the constellations and other celestial objects? I'm sure they've seen comets, meteor showers, and I don't know, not the Northern Lights, but I just want to get a sense of what they use from the sky aside from the moon. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. You talked about how Batanas had a more of a focus on the moon and the wind. Do you see that come up in other groups in the Philippines as well, that you can make that connection rather than the constellations?
Yes, I've seen that in, so I've done more research in the southern part of the Philippines rather than the middle. And there's one group that believes that if the wind is blowing in a certain direction or the clouds are in a certain direction, then there's a dragon. That's the dragon's breath, and that's indicative of the weather the next day. So there is, as I mentioned, that kind of belief system in other parts. And yes, that would be a good link to the Botanist study and see if there are common beliefs, regarding the sun, the moon, and the wind, and maybe daytime too. I don't know, but yeah, I'd love to do that.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I just have a question, actually an observation. In all the pictures that you were showing, I've noticed that you've engaged mostly with male people especially in Basco picture. Was there any difficulty trying to engage with the townsfolks?
Mhm.
Because I haven't seen any women in all the groups that you were with.
Yeah. You mean the people I interviewed?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so the fishermen are all male. But those involved in agriculture, that's family. So both men and women, and quite distinct roles. So you saw them cooking out in the field. That's a female role. Um, but the woman wearing that vako, the long headdress or headgear, she was also like, digging into the soil with a pick and putting the root crops there. So those functions in agriculture are more equally shared between men and women. But fishermen are men and cooks are women, basically.
With that, Almira, I'd like to thank you so much for your talk today.
Thank you.